Welcome back. Ask Coach Nate, episode 12. Today, we're going to discuss route planning for both cycling and running. So, Nate, this is something me and you have talked a lot about. And why don't you kick it off with just helping our audience understand what you think is the best approach for route planning?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on what your goals are. Like on the most basic level, I mean, you can just find good routes that are like, I don't know, lower traffic and just more fun to ride on or better to run on just from like a pleasure standpoint. And then I guess from like a training standpoint, some routes are better than others if you're trying to do certain types of training or, not getting in the way of you doing the types of training that you want to be doing. So like what kind of traffic intersections there are, what kind of descents there are, and sometimes just little things like stringing together different segments can be really helpful. Like sometimes people in the Bay Area have trouble finding segments that they can do hard efforts that are longer than like 10 or 15 minutes because there's a lot of climbs that are that long, but there aren't a lot of climbs that are like 30 or 40 minutes long. So it's hard for people to, know how to get in those longer efforts if they want to. And so sometimes just like a little bit of thoughtfulness and looking around on Strava can help facilitate like fun rides that are pretty safe for the most part and also let you do good training.
Yeah, no, this is a fun topic because I remember when I first started working with you, this became like a big thing for me, like trying to find the right route based on the training program.
It comes up a lot with
Yeah,
people. Yeah, like everything from just like not knowing how to do a good steady endurance ride without having like 15-minute descents like every 30 minutes or so, and also especially like if you're trying to do any longer efforts, like I was saying, that's a really challenging thing for some people. Yeah, so there's a lot, I don't know, there's a lot of benefit that you can get out of just making a little bit of research and a little bit of small adjustments to how you do your routes.
yeah. Even now, I still have to like look in advance for what the training programs are, and then try to like develop a plan in my mind or like a route. Like I've done it a lot now, so I have a good sense of like how to do it. But yeah, it still takes advanced planning, right?
Yeah, a little
Try to
thoughtfulness,
figure out, right?
especially for both of us because we both moved this year. So, I mean, by now we're probably well situated, but it's like you have to, find the new staple routes that you want to use and like what is good for what kind of training and what's like not good for an easy ride because it's like too steep or what have you. Um,
Yeah, no, that's a great point. So I think like the obvious tip for people is group rides are one of the best ways to get routes in general, and group runs exist as well, right? And usually those have been going on for a long time, and people have found just a really good way to navigate through the town, the city, wherever you live. But those aren't happening right now, right? So it's an added challenge to have to go on to Strava, look on other systems like Ride with GPS. I used to use pretty frequently too. They had different types of routes. There was perhaps more running routes at one point um, on there, but ultimately, like it comes down to having to do some recon to kind of figure out, hey, is this route gonna work for me? I've even done like, so when I first moved and I had a temporary place, I even did a few training rides that I knew I could do at certain sections, but I kind of just did the route thinking like, okay, is this going to give me the right amount of time? And I think I even turned back halfway because I didn't have confidence that I would get back in the time that I needed. And then I eventually figured out that I could do the route in the time that I wanted. But yeah, like actually a lot goes into it.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it seems like historically, a lot of times people that are like getting into riding or they move, like going to the local bike shop and asking what their favorite routes are is always like a great go-to. And a lot of times, even now during COVID, like if you don't want to actually physically go to the bike shop, calling them up, most people are helpful and want to help their customers or their community like have good rides. Also connecting with local bike clubs is great, but of course you can't necessarily ride with them. But still, a lot of people, like if you email them or like post on their Strava club message board or whatever, like you can often find good routes. But sometimes like looking up the fast times on Strava near you are really good. Like if you find the best climbs, or like find like some of the better climbs that are like 10, 15 minutes long and see who the fastest riders are, and then go stalk them and see what routes they're doing is like one of the most efficient ways to see like this person clearly knows how to train. They do good training because they have one of the fastest times on, XYZ climb. So then like what routes are they doing? Those are probably decently good training routes. And then you can kind of like take a look at whether or not some of them are like beyond you because they're like too steep or too long or what have you. But a lot of times that's like an easy way to get started.
Yeah, I think I definitely did that at the beginning on Strava too. I followed some people who were obviously really strong just to get a sense of where they were riding. What about for like beyond training, like adventure riding and route planning? What do you recommend people do for that?
the Definitely, I think the biggest thing that I would look for is the Strava heat map if you're trying to like string together a epic long route, or if you are looking for like places to ride that are not as well populated or like outside of your normal range. You can see what roads have frequent bike traffic on them, even if you've never been there before, and then just go on an adventure trying to see what that's like. And yeah, if you don't know what that is, like you can just Google Strava heat map, and then it'll bring up basically a map of whatever area you want to zoom into on a map and show you all the roads that have a heat map. Like there's color on the roads that shows you the intensity that represents like the frequency with which they're ridden with bikes, or you can filter for running and look for like running routes and stuff like that. And it's really useful, I find.
Yeah, I'm trying to think like some of the more crazy adventure routes I did. Yeah, I just planned them out with the route builder on Strava, and it automatically will find what it thinks is the best way to go on a bicycle, like the way that route building works. And so I've generally had good experiences with it. Although, like, I will say, when you get into more rural areas, I recommend everyone be careful because there are roads that allow bicycles, but they can be really dangerous. So when you get into more rural areas, they a lot of times don't have bike lanes, or it'll be a small 2-lane road with traffic going either direction, and cars will go really fast. And
Yeah.
they're not used to having a lot of cyclists there. So I recommend always use caution. There's a few routes that I've done with people where after doing it, we made some adjustments to like find other ways to avoid some of the busier roads where there was like a lot of traffic, just to like reduce the risk.
Yeah. Sometimes looking at like Google Maps Street View can be helpful because you can at least get you can glance at a road. Like if you think that there's going to be like a 5 or 10 mile stretch of road that you're not familiar with and it looks like it could be okay, but you're not sure, checking out what the Street View looks like and seeing if there's a shoulder, seeing what the posted speed limit is can be really helpful for that. I've definitely used that a lot when I've been like traveling or am in some rural place because there's like a race somewhere and you're going for a ride like before the race starts or something like that. You want to make sure you don't get run over.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely would encourage people to use caution. And also, like, there was that big accident in the Nevada area recently, and so I want actually to let people know that like being in a group doesn't necessarily mean you're any safer. That was a big group of people, and they all got hit by a car. Because I know a lot of people think that a group ride somehow is going to be more visible with cars. It may be, but there's not a lot of data out there to prove it. So I think just be really, really careful and really aware. I know that like for me, finding a new route, sometimes it might even be better solo because I'm more nimble and I can decide to like turn back. There's lots of things you could do that might be more difficult to do on a group ride. A group ride can have its own momentum and people just want to start going and start hammering and cycling. That might not always be the best way to find a new route.
Yeah, totally. So how has it been for you getting situated with your new place and finding the new routes? Like what is the sequence of events for you to learn all the best routes? Because obviously
Yeah,
you're like limited with your group riding capacity right now.
yeah, it's such a good question, right? Yeah, there's not like a lot of group riding. There's a few people who I'm very close with, and I'll go ride with them. So to find new routes, yeah, I kind of have to just do it on my own. Luckily, I know a lot of the roads just from riding around, so it's not it's not that unfamiliar. But like we were saying earlier with like training, the routes need to be the right length and get me back at a certain time. And so that's more of the challenge, is like experimenting with will this route, get me back in 2 hours. And so I guess the way I handle it is like I'm just always prepared to do an outback if I have to.
Yeah.
So if I have a 2 hour training program and I'm very confident that this one stretch will work for the first hour, if I go out 1 hour, I know it's about an hour back. And that way, like, I'm guaranteed to get home on time. So I guess that's maybe like the best way to like guarantee when you're first trying a route that you have the time required. And then I'll try to figure out how to connect it through a loop, because that's just a lot more fun. Out and backs can be kind of dull, right?
Yeah.
The other thing I'll do is like I'll find more like loops that I can do multiple times, and that actually works really well depending on the training, right? If I know it's like a 5-minute interval, the shorter intervals, 5 minutes, 3 minutes, 8 minutes, something where you can kind of do laps. If you find somewhere where it's all right-hand turns, you can make the turn on right for the most part. And that works really well because you can find it like perhaps close to where you live. And that works maybe even better with running. I found some loops for running where there's no tracks that are open. Yeah, I've gotten that to
Hear
work.
you at least. I'm
Yeah.
lucky because I live like a mile from a track that's open.
I know
Great.
you're really lucky, right? I found like well, all the office parks are abandoned at this
Yeah,
point.
that's
Like,
pretty key. That's good.
yeah, so that's a great place with a bicycle too, right? You could go and do laps in office parks, parking lots, and running routes usually actually work really well in those types of areas. They generally have sidewalks, they're low traffic, and you can kind of get like a good loop. I haven't mapped out like a 5K and did some 5Ks. I even invited some friends to come and do it. I had like one taker. They thought it was pretty crazy, like the abandoned office park 5K, but it's fun.
Yeah, it's a good opportunity. Yeah, your comment about loops, I think, really rings true to me because I feel like back when I was living in Berkeley and now that I'm living just over the hill, like there's two loops that I've used a lot. And sometimes, like, if I'm trying to do some some training that's a little bit more focused, if you have like one or two good loops that you can just do laps on and you know like what the timing is for the different climbs or the different flat sections, and you can minimize the amount of time spent descending when you can't pedal, like that's huge. I feel like in Berkeley, like the Redwood Pinehurst Loop, it's interesting because like if you go counterclockwise, there's a few minutes of descending where you can't pedal, but most of the rest of the time out of like a 45-minute loop, there's at most 5 minutes when you can't be pedaling if you're going counterclockwise. So it's like that's a great place that I would use to train and do efforts. Or if I was trying to do like a longer loop, but I wanted to add a little bit of time and I didn't have like a time for an epically long loop, I might add just like a lap around and then go home. But in contrast, doing it clockwise, like going from Skyline down Pinehurst, like towards Canyon, it's like the same exact route, but doing it clockwise has at least double the time that you can not be pedaling. So it's like it's not necessarily like worse for just like riding fun, but it's way worse for training.
Yeah, there's a
Like
lot of hills, right, in Berkeley, and so that made it really complicated to plan out a route. I think like for my morning rides, I used to go down to the waterfront and it's pretty flat, and I would try to do my warm up there, and then I would do my intervals on like a relatively one of the least steep streets, and I would just kind of double up and go back and forth, right? I think like you just got to get creative with training. It might sound boring to people, but once I got out there and I was training and doing laps and doing like the same stretch of road up and down a hill, it's actually great because you're like really focused on trying to achieve what you want to achieve. And so if you focus on the goal, right, the power or whatever you're trying to do, it's not as boring perhaps as it sounds. Remember when I first heard about this, I was like, God, doing a lap, it doesn't sound really very interesting. But you can make it fun. So that's how I kind of handle it. Um, what about like running? Do you think there's any specific tips for like running routes that you would recommend?
I mean, I think that it depends on what your goals are. Like if you are training for a certain type of event, especially for running, because you don't have all the gearing selection that you do on a bike. It's good to pick terrain that's going to be similar to the event that you're going to be doing. So for example, like one of the most famous examples is the Boston Marathon, which has an extended period of downhill running, which is a little bit unusual for most major marathons. So people that want to be able to do it well have to be used to downhill running so they don't get completely destroyed by that early on in the race. Likewise, if you're doing like a trail half marathon, for example, and there's like 2,000 or 3,000 feet of climbing over like a 10, 12, 13-mile loop, you want to be practicing that, because if you just run on flat ground, you're not going to be preparing your legs for that. Likewise, if you're training for flat 5Ks or 10Ks or half marathons, or you're training for track racing, doing a bunch of hills can be useful, like if you're trying to build power and you're doing like uphill sprints, or you're doing uphill intervals that are going to build your aerobic capacity, and you want to reduce the impact on your legs so that you can do like more intensity with less like stress on your body, from like an impact perspective. That can be great. But if all you did was run hills and you're very rarely running extended periods of flat running, and you're not getting like the really high paces that you can get on the flats, it's not going to be the most helpful. Like you might be really strong, but you won't have those sustained efforts where you can just run at whatever pace you want on relatively flat terrain for long periods. So it's really good to like cater towards whatever your goal event is. And again, like if it's really hilly, like around here, like in the Bay Area, there's a lot of hillier trails, and like pretty much any place where you'd run on trails, it's going to be a lot of climbing per hour or per mile. So that's great when it's flat and it's uphill, because you can just go like as hard as you want to go. But on the descents, like if they're steep, you kind of have to be just riding the brakes the whole time. And there's a lot of pounding, and it's not the most power output, or like the intensity is not that high, because it's not like you're running as fast as you could be running, because you're just trying to prevent yourself from falling down the hill kind of. So I think really extremely hilly terrain is not the best for building your fitness in the same way that flat or like gradual gradients would be.
Yeah, I think the first trail half I did in like recently, yeah, it had this big descent at the end, and I got really sore. Like I definitely wasn't well prepared. We did a lot of running, right? But yeah, on the descending piece, I started to really come apart. I was like, it was pretty painful. I remember trying to get through that.
Yeah, it was a little bit extra challenging because we were like coming back after the smoke season too. So it's like, I don't know, no matter what the constraints are, you just got to do the best with what you have. But yeah, like if you really wanted to nail something like that, we'd want to be practicing, good hilly running and doing like more downhill running where at intensity, so that you could get used to like the type of impact. And in physiological studies, where if they're studying muscle soreness, like downhill running is one of the common protocols they'll use, because it's like basically just guaranteed to provide the participants with muscle soreness in a way that like a lot of other protocols don't necessarily.
Yeah,
So
it's surprising, right? And people don't necessarily train for that. It's the downhill running, and you got like the impact is pretty significant because you're going downhill and gravity's working with you. And so yeah, it can be a lot. Trail running too has become really popular in general, right? Not just here in the Bay Area, but people really enjoy it, and it's very different than running on the road. I think a lot of people believe that it works well in terms of like uh, preventing repetitive injury types of issues, and like there might be some truth to that, but it's also just kind of a different pace, right?
yeah, it totally depends on what you're trying to do. Like if you look at elite track athletes or elite marathoners where they're trying to go fast on fast courses, like they'll spend a lot of time on the track and they'll spend a lot of time on trails, but it'll probably be like more flat trails, because they're just trying to go fast and they're trying to get the biomechanics of like whatever their race paces are, which is very different than doing the same power output on a 5 or 10% gradient because you're on a hilly trail. But yeah, it just depends on what your goals are and what's going to be good for you. But in general, yeah, like off-road surfaces are a little bit better at absorbing impact. But at the same time, I think shoe technology has changed a lot over the last decade, and a lot of like there's a lot more options for highly cushioned shoes that will probably make running on the road more tolerable to more athletes in a way that 10 or 15 years ago maybe was more of a concern for injury.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because like I got pretty religious about making sure I had good fit and replaced the shoes when I felt that they needed to be. I try to go by mileage and stuff, but it seemed more in line with like what just seemed reasonable based on like, it's very obvious, I think, at some point if you buy a new shoe, you can feel the difference in the two. And so yeah, just trying to make sure my equipment was updated. And like, I don't really have any issues. Like when I first started working with you, like that was the reason I switched cycling, was that I had a lot of like knee issues and hip issues and just like soreness and stuff. And I wanted to switch because I thought I was damaging my body. But like now that I'm trained regularly and consistently and then upgrade my equipment, and I think the shoes have also come a long way. The technology is really good. Like I don't have any knee pain, soreness, nothing. Like I'm quite surprised that there's no issues at all, right? And I get in like, is it like 30 miles a week or something now? In
Yeah,
addition,
close to it. Depends on the week. But yeah, so actually that your comments about running shoe technology and like the impact on injury reminds me of an exchange that I had recently, just thinking about like equipment and how it impacts or relates to our training routes and how we would implement our training. Like I was thinking about that because somebody was asking me about riding routes, and I was like having a little conversation with them on Strava, and they were commenting about how some of the hills near them were like a little bit challenging and beyond them. And I was thinking like, oh, like depending on what bike they have, like just getting a slightly different set of gears can mean that like no route will be off limits for you, especially nowadays when there's so many different options for what kind of gearing you can have. It's like you could potentially train anywhere, and just because you're like not as fit, maybe you're just not going up the hill as fast as somebody that is fitter, but you can still go up these like steep gradients. And especially in a place that's hilly like the Bay, like any road that can be ridden should be accessible to anyone if they have the right equipment for it.
Yeah, that's a great point. When I first started, the first road bike I got did have a 32. It had bigger gearing, and because I didn't have it on the initial road bike I had, and I got that, and I thought it made like a world of difference actually in Berkeley, where there's so many steep, kind of 20-minute long. At the time, they were probably even longer for me climbs, and like having larger gearing made a big difference. And then when I got better, I actually had to upgrade to get tighter gears because I wanted to be able to pedal on the descents to keep the power going. So the equipment made a difference on both ends, right? Like when I was new and I wasn't as strong, I wasn't as fit, having really big gears in the back so that I could spin up the hills and it wasn't too challenging for me, made a huge difference. And then when I got better, I wanted bigger gear actually in the front. So on my chainring, got a bigger gear there. And so then I was able to actually put out more power and not just coast on the descents. And actually made a really big difference in my training, right? Because when I had the smaller gear in the front, I couldn't pedal fast enough on some of the really fast descent. So yeah, like the equipment can make a pretty big difference. I think bigger than people would typically think. Well, like for route building, right? Do you use the route builder in Strava, and do you track different types of routes and stuff? There's actually like a lot of tools on there to let you archive routes.
Yeah. So since usually I'm since I'm normally riding where I know all the routes, I normally pick my routes based on what kind of training I'm going to do. And I started riding like before Strava even existed. So like I had the old school, like run into people and follow them, or like have people tell me which way to go type of learning, progress in the Bay Area. But when I go somewhere else, I'll usually do what I said before. Like I'll look on the heat map and then look up segments, look for the good climbs, look for twisty descents to avoid them. Not so much for safety, but just because I don't want to spend like 20 minutes going down a really tight, twisty descent. I'd much rather go up a climb like that and then go down like the fast side if there is a fast side.
Yeah, I got really into it because like you can go and look at a route someone else had ridden, and then you can save that as a route for yourself, right?
Yeah.
So I would do that. I still do that. And then and then I can even alter it a little bit to make it like more accommodative to what I'm trying to trying to do, the tools are pretty powerful. And then you can even like
Yeah.
download those routes and stuff, right? Because you want to go different area. Sometimes I would get bored and want to go ride somewhere
Yeah.
else.
Yeah, I feel like that's the biggest like sales pitch or like the biggest selling point for the higher end GPS computers. Like if you want to have that ease of use for like learning new routes, that's just going to be a game changer. That having like a basic GPS computer or using Strava on your phone is just not going to hack it if you're trying to learn new stuff from scratch.
Yeah. Okay. And so the last tip I have actually, because I used to do, I liked at one point adventure riding and doing a lot of like route exploration. I found that if I used the Google Maps a lot, and I would get the, either use like Bluetooth headphones or get the headphone into one ear, and it will speak the directions to you. And that's like really, really useful, right? Because you can like use that and really navigate around with Google bicycle directions. It's been a game changer and really saved me. Like if I got lost or I was at like, there's been times where I was like in an area where I just got lost or I needed to find a faster route, and that worked really, really well. I got really into it one point, and I used to just like dial in like burrito, and then it would take me right to the taqueria.
Yeah,
Like,
I've done that too. I find that that's very useful. But it is nice to be aware that they generally have a strong preference for flatter routes. So like depending on where you're at, like that may or may not be exactly what you're looking for like riding. But it can be great. Like I definitely remember using that in DC a little bit the first couple weeks that I was there. Cause like sometimes when there's like lots of little streets and it's like it's confusing. It's like, oh, like is it the first, second, or third right-hand turn? I don't want to get stuck somewhere because it's like the wrong way.
Yeah, I definitely used it a few times where I was like lost. I used to ride to a few races too, and so you'd have to navigate through some streets and stuff. And then once I got into it, I would go out for like these long rides, and I was like, I got really hungry, and I'm like, where's the nearest burrito? And then it would just take me right to the taqueria. It was really fun. So like that's I think that's like one of the final tip I'll give people, at least from my experiences with route planning, is like Google bicycle directions with the earpiece can be a game changer.
Yeah.
When you're hungry or you're trying to get to the start line on time. Well, anything else you want to share about route building or?
I mean, I think that's a good tip. Just like pick routes that are fun, and like figure out like what it is that you're looking for in a route. Cause like for somebody like me, like I want to have good training. I don't mind riding the same roads again, like over and over each week, because I know they're good training and I think they're pretty and I just like being outside. Some people really like the adventure of like exploring new routes, and like they're going to just get a kick out of like looking on Strava and like downloading somebody else's ride and then following it just because like they've never been there before. But it's good to just be clear on what it is that you're trying to accomplish. But yeah, from a training standpoint, like I think the biggest tips that I would have would be to like avoid twisty descents if you're trying to do good training, so that you can just like do the power that you want, and don't be afraid of laps. Like if you can find like 40 to 60-minute loops somewhere that you can maybe repeat a few times, like that can be something you wouldn't want to do every day, but sometimes for those like 1 or 2 workouts a week where you want to do focused work and get it done efficiently and not be stuck in traffic going through some town, that's like a really killer thing. Because especially like as I've I don't know, gotten older and like want to be very efficient with my training, like I really love doing that, where it's like I'm not running the option of like wasting 15 minutes riding through Walnut Creek when I don't want to,
Yeah,
but,
avoiding traffic lights and stuff.
Yeah, totally.
Awesome. Well, hey, anything else?
No, that's good.
Well, great. Hey, if you like this content, of course, you can like the video, subscribe to the channel, and then we'll be back next week.
Take care. Bye.